Morning. How was worship? I missed it. I wasn't here. I slept in. No, that's not true. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for each other. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the promise that if we would, you, the living one, would come and be present. And God, we're counting on that. We're banking on that this morning. There is no reason for us to be here if you won't come. You are everything for this moment. And so we ask again for you to be present. If we read your word, it has to be from your heart to our heart. This has to be like a relational thing, not just a head thing. And so, God, please open us up and please come and speak. Pour in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, guys, we're continuing our study of parts of the Gospel of Matthew. That is, the parts that are only in Matthew and not found, stories and sayings that are not found in other Gospels, just the bits in Matthew. So you'll see this morning in this text here on the back that there are two italicized, bold phrases, statements. Those are the sayings that only occur in Matthew. But if you just try to understand those statements out of their context, they're hard to understand. They're hard enough in their context. So what I've done is I've given you the kind of the before and after of those two statements that only occur in Matthew. So I want to kind of focus on those statements, but I want to look at the whole context of them at the same time. I think that's important. I should also tell you that I've extracted what's in between what would be verse 7 and verse 14 is the bit about where Jesus says, ask, seek, and knock about prayer. That is extracted because that's another gospel. So we're really just looking at these two statements in their own context. So take, 2 or 3 minutes and just quietly to yourself read it. Again, this comes from Matthew 7 if you don't have one of these, if you're going to open your phone. And then we'll have a discussion about it in a minute. Is that about enough time? It's okay to nod at me or talk or yes? Thank you for the thumbs up, man. Appreciate that. You guys good? All right, so just turn to somebody, make a small group, make it just the two of you, and just reflect on this. Talk about it. What do you think it means? Is there a connection between these two statements? If so, what is it? Just talk about it for a couple minutes on your own. Okay. All right, so let's talk about it. Are we going to do the microphone? No, you're running the microphone? I'm looking forward to this. Okay, already. Okay, there we go. Comments or questions?
Okay, so verse 6, not only we're not supposed to give sacred, sacred to the dogs and the pearls to the pigs, but even more they would turn and tear us into pieces?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Say the last part?
The last part, I was just saying that not only we're not supposed to give what's sacred to the dogs, right, and pearls to the pigs.
Right.
Not only that, at the end he finished saying that they could turn and tear you into pieces. Can you clarify that?
I mean, I'm not like a pig expert. Is anybody a pig expert? I don't know. I think if you throw something into the pigs, they'll just tear it up. They'll eat it, like whatever it is. Well, maybe they'll turn on you. I mean, I think the trampling is about the pigs, and the tearing you to pieces is about dogs. So it's like there's these two metaphors. If you throw something precious in with pigs, they won't be like, oh, those are precious, let's save those while we eat the slop. They'll just trample the whole thing. Am I right? Anybody pig farmers here? Anybody? Thank you for the pig farmer over there confirming what I'm saying. I just know in mob movies, they throw the bodies in with the pigs, and the pigs eat the whole entire body. So they don't discriminate between valuable and invaluable things. I think the dogs turn on you. You know, dogs will, I guess if you try to feed a dog something, there's a chance it might bite you. It could turn on you and tear you to pieces. These are metaphors, obviously. I don't think he's really talking about dogs. I don't think he's talking about, don't go, it's not literal. Don't take your jewelry to pigs, obviously. Don't do that. So probably the tearing to pieces also is metaphorical, like you'll get rejected or you'll get damaged somehow in that process. Good question, though. What else? Okay.
I have a question about 3, verse 3 and verse 4. When you, I guess if there's somebody around you that's, doing something bad and you're trying to intervene, do you have the right to say, hey, dude, you're doing this wrong and I feel like you should bring it to Jesus? Or you're like, well, I'm not healed in that area, so I can't say anything, so I don't have authority to say, don't do that. When is it, because the plank's always going to be in your eye, so when do you say, hey, I feel like you should stop? Or I don't know if I'm making sense.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Does this mean that we can't correct anyone? Is the prohibition against judgment, is there a kind of pulling back here where we should all just say, listen, just don't get in the business of other people. You got your problems, you're always going to be a sinner, so don't insert yourself, don't interfere, don't try to correct other people. I don't think that's what it's saying. In fact, I think the goal is that you could take that speck of dust out of your brother's eye. That's what he actually says in the end. He says, first take the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to do the lesser work. But the greater work is deal with yourself. And yes, I do think there's a prohibition saying, if you struggle with the thing you're about to correct a person, maybe somebody else should do the correcting. Can we agree on that? The person you're about to correct. You definitely should not be the one. Now, I know you're going to have that urge, but I really, really, really want to correct them. You're not the one. Just know that. Just accept that you're not the one to do it. Now, this is particularly tricky because, as C.S. Lewis says, the thing we most despise in others is the thing we most despise in ourselves. So if you want to know, for example, what is your probably worst thing that you do or your biggest weakness, just ask yourself what most annoys you in other people. Yeah? Think about the person that just drives you bonkers, that you just think, oh, that person, that's probably because that person does exactly what you do. what's happening is that person is a mirror for the thing you most dislike about yourself. This is good stuff, huh? This message already sucks, you know. How quickly can I get out of here or whatever? What else? Yeah, up front.
Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. And then it says, this is what's kind of confusing to me. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit.
Yeah.
So I'm confused. If you're a good tree, and I'm whole in Jesus, but I do bear bad fruit.
Yeah.
Does that mean I'm not a
Yeah.
good tree and I'm going to be tossed into the fire, like it says, after this? Or I'm confused as to I bear bad fruit all the time.
Yeah. I hate that. I hate this black and white. It's very difficult. I think this is one of those things that I need to really be careful not to explain this away. I'm not super comfortable with Jesus being this black and white and saying there's good trees and bad trees. I wish there could be like in-between trees, because that's what I am. What about in-between trees, Lord? What are they? What happens to them? Maybe they just get pruned a little and welcomed into the kingdom or something. So I'm not super comfortable either with this black and white language. I can't make it go away though. It's there. And Jesus is wiser, smarter, more connected to God than we are. So we just need to accept it, press into it, try to figure it out. But he is sort of saying trees, and if we are to be compared to trees, basically are bearing good fruit or they're bearing bad fruit. And maybe by the end we'll come back to that and try to figure out whether or not our lives in general is bearing good fruit or bad fruit. Really important question. What else? Okay, way over there. Look at him go, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, that's
One of the things we noticed was that there was a lot of very serious things in here, being torn apart, being thrown into the fire and consumed, being ferocious wolves. Everything that he's talking about is very serious and very grave, and there's a lot of kind of doom in it.
That's it, huh? Yes, this is a doom and gloom kind of passage. It is, but I also think that in the context of the Sermon on the Mount, this is about a vision. This is what I've said before. It's about a vision of what we could be. And I do think that part of it is we have to isolate how we're kind of missing it or coming up short in order to be able to pull back and say, what could life be like? What would community be like? What could the church be like? What would the world be like if it were not this way? So I think there's hope on the backside of it. And even the idea of being a good tree bearing good fruit, I think there's hope in that as well. But you're right, it is grave. And I actually really like that word, and I'm going to come back to it. All right, listen, at first blush, this text can feel like Jesus is saying, just don't judge anyone. I mean, don't involve yourself in the affairs, the morality, the life choices of other people. And I know some of you are going to take it that way. Some of you are going to just be like, I just try not to judge people. I don't want to get involved in other people's mess. You do that thing, that's fine. I think that's really to misunderstand what Jesus means here. And actually, that view, like don't get involved in other people's stuff, that view doesn't fit with the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. It doesn't fit with the rest of this text, because Jesus is actually saying, in just a couple verses later, you should judge whether a person is a pig or a dog. Isn't he? He's saying you have to make a judgment call as to whether or not you share this sacred thing with this person or not. As to whether or not they will receive it or they're the right person for it. And then just a few steps later, he'll say, you have to make a judgment call between true and false prophets, don't you? He's saying beware. He's saying, hey, pay attention and figure out some people look like sheep, but they're really wolves on the inside. Isn't that a judgment call? So on the one hand, he's saying, man, just don't judge at all. Just don't do it. So like, okay, I don't want to judge anyone for any reason. But then immediately he's calling us to use our judgment. So what is the issue here? What is the actual concern? And even in the little parable of the two brothers, one with a speck of sawdust in his eye and the other with a board sticking out of his eyeball, even in that parable, which is humor, it's actually a joke. It's meant to be farcical, even in that, he's saying the goal, the end result is you want to help your brother get that speck of dust out of his eye. That's what you're hoping to do. You should do that. We want that. But the problem is, when you have this big, huge plank in your eye, that's crazy that you're trying to help him first. It's about proximity and priority. He's not saying don't worry about the splinter in your brother's eye. He's not saying don't consider the splinter in your brother's eye. He's actually saying help him take it out. On the contrary, I think that's what the passage is all about, actually. It's about this pearl, this gift, the grace of having people in your life who love you enough to look deeply into your eyes and see that last speck of dust, and who love you enough to help you take it out. That's the pearl. The sacred thing in this life is to have people that love you enough, that care enough about you, to be able to share that last little bit, that growth thing for you. The problem, though, the disease, is hypocrisy. You see, if we suffer from the disease of hypocrisy, we are disqualified from giving that pearl. We become disqualified from sharing that grace of correction. Correction should be a gift. But if it comes from a hypocrite, it isn't, is it? I mean, does anybody want to be a hypocrite? Have you ever liked a hypocrite? Have you ever thought, hypocrisy's not that bad? Does anyone think that? I don't know that I've ever met anyone that thinks hypocrisy's not that bad. I mean, there are a lot of sins, a lot of things that people do that we're sort of soft on. Hypocrisy is not one of them, is it? Is it? Are you guys cool with that? Are you cool with hypocrisy in yourself or others? Talk to me. Thank you. I need to get the defibrillator out for some of you this morning. Clear? My 17-year-old who's just running around, unfortunately, carries the gift of judgmentalism. He's very judgmental, unfortunately. But he what he'll say when he's judging his siblings or something, they're always like, "Shut up!" And he'll come to me and he'll say, "Dad, I don't understand. I'm just trying to help." That's always what he says. "Dad, I'm just trying to help." I'm like, "Yeah, but you don't understand. They don't want your help because you do the same thing you're criticizing them for." It's not that they don't need help. It's not that he isn't right, because most of the time, he's right. In fact, just close your ears real quick, Noah. Like 99% of the time, he's right. It's not good for him to hear that. It really isn't. But because he does the same thing, he is disqualified from being the one to point it out, to share it. Before we ever correct another person, we have to examine ourselves to see if the thing that we're about to bring up or to address in the other person is something that we're habitually guilty of. Doesn't that make just basic sense? But we still do it. I love this little parable that Pete Rollins tells. I'm going to read it to you. I think it illustrates the issue. There once was a young minister sitting in his house on a Sunday afternoon who was disturbed by a frantic banging. On opening the door, he was confronted by a distraught member of the church. It was obvious that the man was exhausted from running to his house, and he was actually on the verge of tears. "What's wrong?" asked the minister. "Please, can you help me?" the man replied. "A kind, considerate family in the area is in great trouble. The husband recently lost his job. The wife cannot work due to health problems. They have 3 young children to look after. The man's mother lives with them, and she's unwell and needs constant care. They're 1 day late on their rent. 1 day. But despite the fact that they've lived there for 10 years with no problems and will likely have the money later in the week, the landlord is going to kick them all onto the street if they don't pay the full amount by the end of the day." "Well, that's terrible," said the minister. Of course we'll help. I'm going to go right now and get some money from the church fund to make up for the shortfall. Anyway, how do you know them? Oh, replied the man, I'm the landlord. The parable is perfect. It's a perfect expose on modern Christian hypocrisy. Because we are never so harsh as we are, never so critical as we are on what the church ought to do. And we're capable somehow, for some reason, of looking at the church and saying, the church ought to be compassionate. The church ought to give away its money to the poor. The church's doors should always be open to those in need, anytime, anywhere. The church ought to live in such a way as to bring honor to the name of Jesus at all times. The church ought to pay its people very low salaries and live very sacrificially. The church ought to do all this. And sometimes, while saying those very critiques, we don't even think that we don't do those things ourselves. What is the church if not a collection of people, individuals? And yet somehow we have a kind of immunity from our own critique of what Christians ought to do or the church ought to do. People are in love with talking about what Christians and church people ought to do. Even non-Christians love to talk about what Christians should do. And they get mad at Christians because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But do we? Do you? Sometimes the very problems that the church is supposed to be solving are caused by us. This is such a clear story of modern hypocrisy. Because I think we have become masters at saying the right things, caring about the right things, retweeting the right things, even when our own behavior betrays the things we say we believe and care about. Nobody actually cares anymore whether a person embodies what they say. What they care about is whether you're saying the right things and whether your heart feels the right things. So the issue is not whether you actually serve the poor. The issue is, do you think serving the poor is right? The issue isn't anymore, guys, can we just stop moving around? I don't know what's going on. There's a lot of everybody's up and moving. Babies are okay. Not sure what adults are doing. That's another baby. Awesome. Maybe my staff could just help us calm the crowd a little bit. Helps me. We are focused on feeling the right thing, the right emotion toward the right issue, so that we show ourselves to be what? Modern, or we show ourselves to be enlightened in some way, because I think racism is wrong, but I don't do anything to actually stop the bleeding in what is a racialized America. I think that people ought to help the poor. I think the churches ought to help the poor. But I don't actually help anybody who's poor. I think people should be overly generous with their money, but this year I couldn't give any money away. I think the church should be giving half its money or whatever. And instead, what ends up happening is I look at my own giving. I'm giving what, 1%, 2% of my income, if that? If the end goal is that we can be the kind of people that can look honestly and with integrity at each other's lives and make our lives better, find that last speck of dust in each other, but hypocrisy disqualifies us, then we're in big trouble. Because our lives are still full, our communities are still full of hypocrisy. The issue is not that we're wrong in what we see. The issue is not that the hypocrite is wrong in what they say, because often they are correct. It's that what they see is small in comparison to what they don't see. It's an issue of scale. It's not that the splinter in your eye isn't important and shouldn't be taken out. It's that when there's this bigger issue, why are you focusing on the small issue when there's a big issue? And Christians are renowned for this as well. We're what I would call speck of dust people. We love to focus on inconsequential things, little bits of theology, or little bits of church practice, or how the music sounds, or whether that particular thing, or how the kids' ministry is set up, or those kind of things that are not completely unimportant, but they're just so small in comparison to the bigger issues of the world and the kingdom of God. The problem is always blindness. This is Jesus saying, you pay no attention. That's what he says in the first part, and then he says later, so that you can see clearly. The issue is about seeing. It's about blindness. The problem is that we can see clearly the error of another, but we have trouble seeing clearly the error in our own lives, and this is a real threat to our soul. The church, unfortunately, is full of speck of dust people. You guys aren't really like this, I don't think, not particularly. And it's nice to be back with you, frankly, because this last weekend I went and spoke at a conference with just like everyday Christians, ordinary Christians. And it just kind of really made me want to come back here. No offense to those people intended necessarily. I spoke at this conference, and unfortunately, I didn't realize this until I got there. I was the whole content of the conference. That is a bad idea. So there were no seminars. There was only 4 plenary sessions, and I was the speaker at all 4 sessions. And when I looked at that, I was just like, wow, we're in trouble. You know, this is not enough. But anyway, I did what I do, and the third talk actually was Saturday night, and I gave this kind of very impassioned plea for these people to give their life towards something that mattered, to actually fight against great evils in our world. Evils like child exploitation and slavery, like sexual exploitation of children and women all over the world. Called to deal with what is a suffocating poverty for 2/3 of the world, and a severe made this sort of impassioned plea. And actually, when I had finished my 4th talk, I just kind of was tired, because I tried to pour myself out, and so I kind of made my way to the back of the room and leaned against the wall, just sat on the floor against the wall, and they were still having some response time, and some music was going, and people were still listening, and a woman came back to sit by me. She sat down next to me, and I could tell that she was troubled, and she wanted to talk, and I was happy to hear. And so I said, hi. She said, I'm bothered by something. Can I talk to you about it? I said, of course. What is it? She said, well, it's something that you said that kind of has bothered me. It's irking me. And can I bring it up? I said, of course, please. Tell me what it is. And she said, well, twice in the weekend you said, oh my God. I said, okay. And what else? She's like, well, I think that's wrong, and I was taught, I was raised that you can't do that. You can't. That's like using the Lord's name in vain, and you just really shouldn't do that. And I just really feel like that's bad, and I need to talk to you about it. And so I just took a deep breath, and I just looked at her. I said, are you serious? She said, yes, I'm very serious about this. And I said, after all the things I said this weekend, that's what you want to talk to me about? She was like, well, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like it's wrong. I said, after all of the issues that I brought up, this is what's on your heart. And I said, you are sick, and you have a problem, a serious problem. And I don't know this woman at all. Probably never talk to her again. But I said, this legalism is going to kill your soul. You're already done spiritually. If after listening to all the things I said, this is what you want to talk to me about, this is what's on your heart, this is a speck of dust person. It grieves God. You're missing everything that matters because you're focusing on this. I said, listen, even if that were a sin, what I did, even if it's a sin, if I admit that, which it isn't, and I'm not going to, because Exodus 27 does not apply here. I was not misusing God's name. But even if you're right, which is possible, even if I'm wrong, didn't I already say I'm a sinner? Why is this news? Why is this worth even talking about? When we're looking at these plank-size evils in the world, and you want to come what? Fix this last little thing inside of me? Good luck, lady. You know what I mean? I'm like, is it news that I say things that are wrong occasionally? Listening to me for 4 straight hours, and I said 2 things that are wrong, I'm like, that's awesome. That's like an incredible batting average for me. Breathtaking. It was a speck of dust moment. Speck of dust people don't love God. They love perfection. They love control. They love superiority. They love the law. And they fear weakness, vulnerability, and grace. Speck of dust people fear grace because it just lets people off the hook. What, Brian's just going to walk away having broken one of the 10 commandments? I don't think so. Not on my watch. I wonder if it's even possible to carry on a relationship with a crucified God as a speck of dust person. They want to correct my grammar, but not stop sexual abuse or poverty or oppression or unbelief. Those things are not worth talking about. Speck of dust people are destined to become hypocrites. Destined to become hypocrites. Because in their zeal to make the world right for God, they lose the beating heart of God, which is forgiveness and grace. You know what? Jesus even said the heart of the law is mercy. So she's even a bad legalist. You'll get that later maybe. What are we, guys? What are we if not sinners who have been forgiven? It's what we are. It's the best thing about us. It's what makes us Jesus' people. Failures forgiven, redeemed. That meal, and he takes that bread, as we will do later, and he breaks it. And he hands it to them, and he says, "This is my body broken for you, because of you." Do you understand that when we eat that bread, we take the culpability of the cross? We admit our guilt. Broken for you. I have to be broken for you. I will bleed for you. Because you should be breaking. Because you should be bleeding. And we share that meal, that sacred covenant meal. We share it because we are all failures and sinners. You know what the antidote, the real way to solve hypocrisy is to believe that you are always the worst sinner in any room you're in. It is impossible to be a hypocrite if you think that every room you're in, you're the worst sinner. Do you know that? I mean, does anybody not want to be a hypocrite? Are you with me on this? But the way to not be a hypocrite is not to like focus on not being a hypocrite. It doesn't work that way. The way to not be a hypocrite is to just recognize that in any room I walk into, I'm probably the worst person here. It's a model given to us by the Apostle Paul even, who called himself the chief of sinners. He needed to be broken for you, for your crimes. Anyway, if the disease is hypocrisy, which I think it is, what do we do with it? And what is he talking about here with all this stuff about correction? I mean, on the one hand, you're like, don't be a hypocrite, of course. But also the other issue is don't listen to hypocrites either. Because when people want to come and correct you, who should you listen to? That's part of the problem here, is Jesus is saying, yeah, don't listen to the person who is more guilty of the thing, or who is actually a wolf disguised as a sheep. Hypocrisy disqualifies you from bringing that pearl, from giving that gift. You really should, if you think the thing you're about to correct the person in, if you think you struggle with that more than that person, you probably should be quiet and leave that to someone else. And the truth is, people are not open to us sometimes. And sometimes they're not open because we are hypocrites on the subject. And sometimes they're not open because their hearts are not open. Because they'll treat that gift, even if you're right about it, they'll treat that gift as something to trample. But correction is sacred. But listen, this is how I'm going to put it. Correction must come from a trusted source, and it must be received by a faithful heart. It must come from a trusted source, and it has to be received from a faithful heart. The truth is, real, godly, beautiful, life-giving correction is rare. It's rare to find because either the person telling us shouldn't be the one telling us, or our hearts are not right and we don't receive it as a gift. But the truth is, in every place that you see correction in Scripture, from the Proverbs all the way through the Gospels, all the way into the rest of the New Testament, correction is a gift. Proverbs says, the wise man loves a rebuke. The fool hates correction. Fools hate correction. And the truth is, a little bit of accountability really helps us. Like just a little bit of accountability. Even someone asking the question out of love, not out of judgment, and not out of superiority, but one sinner asking another sinner a question of accountability, it really actually helps us. Little questions like, hey, how's your prayer life going? Or have you spent any time this week with your children? Or how are you doing on that anger problem that I know you're dealing with? These kind of questions actually really help us. There's an interesting piece of research that was done by a 13-year-old. Google has this sort of research program to see people that have these ideas, to see what the top 10 are or whatever. So this little girl, 13-year-old girl, actually came up with this little app that she attached to social media platforms to deal with the issue of cyberbullying. This was her concern. Apparently there's a lot of this where teenagers will just like trash each other online because somehow they can feel the bravado of the distance that the internet provides. And so people just say mean things and harm each other, even to the point where kids have committed suicide or harmed themselves because they're being trashed on the internet. And so this little girl was trying to figure out a way to deal with that. So she came up with this app. I think this is fascinating. It's called the Rethink Project. This is what she developed. And the app attached itself to your social media. And what it did is it somehow was able to figure out when you're writing something really mean to post to another person. And it just popped up a little screen just before you send. So you hit send on your mean cyberbullying message. And just then it pops up a little message that just says, are you sure you want to send this? Just popped up like, hey, that's kind of harsh. So it's not a person, it's just a message. Do you know that from 12 to 18-year-olds, 93% said no, just because of that little message? 93% of kids, when just asked that one simple question, you sure you want to say this? Actually re-looked at their message and said, yeah, maybe I don't. So only 7% were like, Heck yeah, I'm saying it. I mean, teenagers struggle with impulse control. That's one of their main things. Like, oh, I'm going to say this to them. And just a simple question, a simple accountability. What a profound impact it can have. The truth is we need people looking at the dust and the splinters in our eyes, in our lives. We need it. We need people asking those questions. Retreating and pulling back from accountability, retreating and pulling back from caring about another person's growth or well-being is not the answer. That's not what Jesus is saying. He's just saying don't do it as a hypocrite. He's just saying make sure that you, if you're going to do that in somebody else's life, that you've taken seriously your own life. Your own life in reaction or response to that truth that you're about to bring. We don't need less interaction in our bad decisions from each other. We need more. The problem is, from whom will we hear it? That's the question. And this brings us really to the issue of true and false prophets. It brings us to what I think, if the disease is hypocrisy, then the antidote is gravitas. It's what the old seminary professors used to speak about as a necessary trait for anyone who would go into ministry. They called it gravitas. Craig Barnes writes this about gravitas. It refers to a soul that has developed enough spiritual mass to be attractive, like gravity. It makes the soul appear old, but gravitas has nothing to do with age. Listen to this. This is so profound. It has everything to do with wounds that have healed well, failures that have been redeemed, sins that have been forgiven, thorns that have settled into the flesh. These severe experience with life expand the soul until it appears larger than the body that contains it. It's some of what I think Melissa was talking about the other day when we talked about the secret life. When your soul appears larger than the body that contains it. The problem with hypocrisy is the converse. It's that we're listening to a person say the right things, but when we actually look at their life, we think they're not embodying. We think they're too small to say those words to me. And gravitas is the opposite. It's a person that when they try to say something about God, some truth that they have wrestled from life itself, when they say those truths to us, somehow we know words are failing them, that there's an understanding that they have laid hold of, that the words are not capturing, that the words are less than what they know, not more. And when a hypocrite speaks, we realize these words are more than you know. That you're saying the right thing, but you don't really know what you're talking about because you haven't embodied it yourself. Working for years like I did, supervising InterVarsity staff workers, hiring these young 21, 22, 23-year-olds to go on campus and take that campus for Jesus, lead other college students. And the number one problem I saw in those leaders, the number one challenge that they had was that they lacked a kind of spiritual authority. And some of that is not their fault. It's just you're young. And when you're young, you just don't have enough life experiences. You don't have enough scars. You see, gravitas comes from scars. Now, nobody wants a leader that has gaping wounds bleeding out. That's not what we're talking about. And that's a different issue. Like running around wounded or bleeding is not a good leader. But people who have scarred, people who have healed from deep wounds, those are the most trusted leaders. Those are people, we're talking about cancer survivors, people that have been through something they didn't even want to go through. They never asked to go through, but somehow they make it through. And there is a depth when they talk about life and death. Gravitas is not something you can just go to school and get. It's not something you can get from a class. It's not something you can be trained in. It's about failing and somehow getting through it. It's about being forgiven by God. It's about recognizing deep, deep struggles and pain and getting through it somehow. It's about learning the hard lessons of life and with God, and knowing that He is still there. Gravitas comes through persecution, through suffering, through sacrifice. And sometimes people just make choices, and the choices that they make are great choices. The choices to sacrifice, to walk away from a toxic relationship, to give away their wealth in order to serve the poor, to move into a place which is harder than a place that is easier. Those kind of choices give you gravitas. They deepen you as a human being. And some of you wonder why no one listens to you. You have great ideas. Why does no one follow you? You say all the right things, but your life lacks gravity. No one is being drawn into your orbit, not because you aren't a kind person or because there isn't some goodness to what you're saying. It's because you haven't made those hard choices yet. Most of you know we just finished writing a book. I wrote this book with Mike, and the truth is I want Mike to write. I was pushing him to write because I think he has a voice that people need to hear. But, he was reluctant because writing an entire book, never having done it, is a lot to ask of a person. Also, he's just a very much achievement kind of person. I know Mike doesn't want to do something unless he can do it very, very well. So he's a little slow on the beginning of a thing. So I just thought, well, what happened was it came to a point where I thought, I was writing this book, and I thought maybe Mike should be a part of it. And I came to this part where I thought, if this book is going to be about radical discipleship, then I need to talk about prayer. I need to talk about the deep, hiding, secret life of prayer. And the truth is, I don't know anybody, I've never met anybody that more embodies that deep, profound, secret life of prayer than Mike. He is the real thing. He makes me look like a spiritual midget when it comes to prayer. And I love that about him. He has a gravity. We were together writing, and I would wake up maybe 7:30 in the morning. He had already been up for 2 hours in communion and prayer with God. He was spending the whole entire summer he covenanted with God to spend the first 3 hours of every day in prayer. And this is ordinary for him. It's just who he is. It's the way he is. It's a choice that he made, a discipline that he keeps. Now you tell me, if a person chooses that over the course of 10, 20 years, does that give them something? And it's not something that you put on a resume. It's not something anyone can see. It's not tangible, but it's a gravity that draws other heavenly bodies to themselves. Not something we can always put our fingers on. In the same way we can't put our finger on hypocrisy, we have trouble putting our finger completely on gravitas. It's funny because he's such a raging extrovert that he puzzles me, vexes me, of how he can spend so much time alone in prayer. And I just think, well, I don't get you. I should be I like being alone. You hate being alone. Even writing, he would come out. I'm like, dude, you have to leave me alone. I have to write. He's like, okay. And he would leave, and he would just come right back with some chips or something. He wanted to talk to me about what he's thinking. He wants to process outside, external. And then he would run off because he talked to me, and so I'd listen to his ideas, and we go back and forth. Then he'd run off and write them down and come back again and screw me up. And I need space. And he'd be left alone. And he wants to talk, everything. He wants to be with someone. And so finally I just asked him, I said, Mike, I don't get you at all. It makes no sense to me. Somebody that's so dependent on your extroversion, how is it that you can maintain such an extraordinary prayer life? You hate being alone. How can you do this for 3 hours, 4 hours at a time? How do you do it? And he looked at me, and to my shame, this is what he said. He said, because I'm not alone. I mean, the truth is, for him, he's with the person he most wants to be with in the world. And his extroversion drives him in that relationship with God. It keeps him going for hours. Isn't it interesting that me as an introvert thinks of prayer as being alone? And he as an extrovert thinks of prayer as being with his Father. And he carries, because of that choice that he's made, the discipline that he's maintained, the authenticity of his life, the authority that he carries in that is gravitas. It doesn't always come from suffering. that's external, that's put upon you. Sometimes it comes from a suffering that you embrace yourself, to know something about God, to go deeper with God. And the truth is, all of you could go on an adventure like that with God. All of you probably know something in your life that you could give away, or something in your life that you could sacrifice in the hopes of knowing God. This is what fasting is. And we're not a culture that's good at fasting. We're a culture that's good at consuming, taking what we want, and thinking about God in terms of what gives us happiness, fulfillment, or pleasure. And this is a mistake, because all it does in the end is create hypocrisy, not gravitas. The soul appears bigger than the body containing it. It's like the understanding is greater than the words of the speaker. It's like when I listen to someone with gravitas talk about something in which they have authority, it's like I know I have to press in. I have to listen more. I have to be quiet, because I think this person knows something about this, about life, about God that I don't know. They have a right to speak into my life. They have a right to challenge me. And the contrast is, when a hypocrite speaks, they could say the exact same thing. They could use the exact same words as someone with gravitas. And that's what happens to us. The longer we're in church with church people, and the longer we're around people with real gravitas, we can copy what they say. We could take it word for word. We could read someone in their great sacrifice, their choices, and share that with another person and seem sort of puffed up and bloated. But here's the thing, guys. People know. Our souls know. It's like a force at work of gravity or repulsion. We're either drawn in by the truth of what you're saying and the truth of the body that lives out the thing that you're saying, or we're repulsed by it because we know somehow it's not really true for you. People know. Hypocrisy, then, is the soul seeming smaller than the body that contains it. Like a little miniature soul inside your body that probably shouldn't be talking to anybody. Jeremy liked that. Go grow your soul. Anyway, true prophets, this last image that he gives us, true prophets have this. False prophets don't. True prophets have this gravitas to their lives. They challenge us. And we know somehow they have a right to. But false prophets don't. They might have the words, but they don't have the heart and they don't have the life. There are some instructions here on how to correct people and how to not correct brothers or sisters. But then, more than that, like I said a minute ago, I think this is a vision for the kingdom. People so filled with gravitas, so deeply honest. People who've had their battle with sin and Satan, that have been to hell and back, that have wrestled with their own doubts and fears. I don't give you some bumper sticker theology, but speak from the depth of having doubted themselves, struggled themselves. And people who come to us, not in pride or judgment or superiority, but the people who come to us in genuine power and spiritual authority and love. Do you want to be that kind of person? And gravitas always challenges us, even without words, even when that person doesn't say anything. And you're just around them. It makes you want to run to a mirror and look for the last speck of dust in your eye. Sure, in one sense we could just say get rid of hypocrisy. That's a takeaway from this text. Get some gravitas. Maybe that's a takeaway, but I don't know. I don't think it's enough. I think we need a different focus. I'm describing phenomenon. I'm not necessarily prescribing behavior. This is important that you get this. I'm describing these phenomena that exist that I think you know is true, that somehow you relate to this, both in the experience of someone with gravitas and the experience of someone with hypocrisy. And we know one's bad and we know one's good. Because I don't think the answer is to just say, let's not be hypocrites. I don't think it works that way. going to invite up the worship team. This is what I want to leave you with. This is, I think, the solution. So, if the disease is hypocrisy, the antidote is gravitas, the outcome, which goes back to the issue of fruit, the trees that we are, a good tree or a bad tree, and that's all about what your life produces. What are the outcomes of your life? And maybe I want to ask you to think about that for a second. What is your life producing? And how do you live a life that produces good fruit? Because again, I don't think you like strain and think about fruit, pop out an orange or something like that. That can't be the way to produce good fruit. If we look at John 15, for example, Jesus is saying all about this. In fact, I would encourage you maybe this week to even put that in your devotion time with God. Look at John 15. How is it that we bear fruit for God? It's not by thinking about fruit. It's not by trying to be a good tree instead of a bad tree. The way we bear fruit is by abiding in the fruit giver, by being connected to that living source, that vine. And when we make that connection, in the end, the fruit that comes is not our own. It's not something we perform or give to God as if now I'm going to be a good tree, not a bad tree. Like some sort of twisted child that has to perform for their parents. I'm going to be a good little boy and not a bad little boy. I'm going to be a good tree, not a bad tree. And then we take our little weird fruit and we say, God, is this good fruit or bad fruit? You accept it or you reject it? And I think the answer is to press in to the gospel, the cross, and the resurrection. To hear again that thing that saved us, that continues to save us. To let it define who you are, how you think about yourself, and how you think about the person sitting next to you, and the person across the auditorium, and the person on the stage. I read a fascinating story in the early days of what is now called Pixar, the animation company, the computer animation company. You've heard of Pixar? I said Pixar. That's not what I meant. Pixar? Have you heard of Pixar? Please don't come talk to me afterwards about having said piss on stage. I apologize. I guess in the early stages, this computer division was actually bought by Lucasfilm. It was owned by Lucasfilm, which is the Star Wars kind of franchise. And at first, George Lucas was fascinated by the computer division. This is like mid-'80s. And thought it was kind of an interesting, innovative thing. But Lucasfilm, about 1985, hit a real financial crisis, and they were losing money. They were bleeding money. So they had to look around the company and say, what are the failing divisions? What are the divisions that are losing us, like economically unviable? And one of them was this computer division. The division was run by two guys. One guy was named Ed Catmull. The other was named Alvy Smith. Catmull and Smith had been running this division for some years, and they believed it was the future. They believed it was the future of animation. They imagined making great films like Dumbo and Bambi and great Disney movies, but they wanted to make them through computers. This was their vision. Lucasfilm then appointed a president to go in and make all these cuts, and so the president kept hitting Catmull and Smith, saying, you've got to get us a list of people to fire, a list of people to downsize. We need that list. And Catmull and Smith just kept avoiding them, just kept putting them off, kept trying to not answering emails, not showing up to meetings, just like not coming, like avoiding the issue, avoiding the problem. And so finally, the president said, you will have a list for me tomorrow in my office at 9 a.m. You will have it. So knowing they were backed into a corner, they showed up and delivered the list. And on the list, there were two names. Ed Catmull. They backed him into a corner to say, if you're going to get rid of some of our people, you must get rid of us. put themselves on the chopping block of their people. Because they were indispensable to the company, they backed off the downsizing, gave them a little more time. Of course, then eventually they're purchased by Steve Jobs and Pixar develops, and the rest is history, as they say. But all those employees heard the story. They knew that these two guys had saved their jobs. They put their own jobs on the line for them. That whole division owed those men their jobs and served them for the years that came with loyalty and love. Because they put their own job, their own performance on the line for them. Now listen very carefully to me. When justice demanded your name, when you were the criminal, the failure, no matter where we are on the journey, no matter how far we've come, no matter where we just started or we've been doing this for 20 years, we all come to this table the same. We all take the bread again into our hands and say, your body was broken for me, instead of me. The night he was betrayed, Jesus, once he had given thanks, took bread and broke it. He handed the broken pieces to his disciples. He said, this is my body. It's broken for you. Eat it to remember me. The same way after supper, he took the cup and he said, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, shed for the forgiveness of sin. Drink it to remember me. And so we do. Remember where we come from, who we were, what he's done for us. We let it define us, shape us. We let it make us community. The people who come to the table, the people who eat the broken bread, the people who drink the cup. It makes us the same. It makes superiority impossible. It makes hypocrisy impossible. Guys, as you come forward this morning and take the elements like we always do, I want you to think about this. Craig Barnes uses this illustration, which I think is good. You can either try to achieve your life, and some of us are like this. We see our life as a series of goals, and I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to try to achieve it. And if you do, if you approach your life that way, like I'm going to go try to achieve my life, your life is going to be full of complaint and disappointment and shortcomings and judgment. You're going to look at other people as always coming up short. You're going to look at yourself as always coming up short. It's never going to be good enough. It's never going to be right. It breeds hypocrisy, breeds judgment, kills gravitas. Or Instead of trying to achieve your life, you can receive your life. That means let your life come to you. Look at your life as that thing that God is doing in and around you. Look at God as the primary actor in your life and accept it, receive it, see all the amazing thing that He's doing in you, through you, around you, and receive it as a gift. If you'll do that, if you'll take your life as a gift, receive it as a gift, your life will be full of gratitude. Guys, just examine your own hearts. Remember again the gospel, what He's done for you, who you are. And maybe there's some plank, maybe even as we're talking, something God has put His finger on something in your life that you just know, I need to deal with that. I need to take that out of my own eye. Do it. There's no time like the present. Don't run from it. Don't put it off. Just go ahead and repent. Deal with it. God will take it away from you right now. When you're ready, when your heart is ready, guys,